Hi, it's Peter Boyles. Welcome again to what we have dubbed The Shoot, a series of, I think, very good YouTube video interviews with really important people, writers, historians, people from politics, but this could be one of the best. Of course, for the longest time, I did the morning show over next door at 710 KNUS, have gone into retirement, but The Shoot has been really successful, and thank you all for watching this. So, as we wrapped it up last week, we were talking with a historian, and we were actually talking about parts of the Second World War and the modern Cold War. And I was leaving, and Mark Crowley, who puts all of this together for The Shoot, hands me this book, and he said, here's next week's show. And the book, of course, Sacrifice. So I walked out, and I began the book, and I didn't put it down. This is one of those moments everyone needs to read and certainly listen to, I think, this incredibly brave woman. The book is Sacrifice, a Gold Star widow's fight for the truth. Welcome to The Shoot, Michelle Black. Hey, Michelle, thanks for doing this, and it means so much to me. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, we were talking before this began. We both have a passion for skiing and boarding, and so it begins with you in the mountains in California. If you would, tell the story.
Yeah, after college, I went up to Mammoth Lakes, California, and decided to just be a ski bum for a little bit. And I was instructing snowboarding, and one night at my church, I turn around and there is this big guy who looks like he's a wrestler. And turns out his name was Bryan Black. He had moved to town as well. He was working playing online poker for a living so he could ski during the day. And he actually dated one of my coworkers for a while. And he told me later that his plan was to try and get me interested in him and then eventually date me, which did end up happening after about a year.
Well, you know, what's you and I are talking about how much we love skiing and boarding, and I know that both of your sons are now boarding and skiing, but the idea of living in the mountains and how many people went off and did that just sort of set the stage. How many people were you actually living with? And people called them ski bums, but it's a true part of life that I wish I'd have done. How did you bum? How did you do it?
Depending on the time of year,
Yeah, yeah.
the slow season might have been three or four people, the busy season up to eight.
Oh,
So yeah, and we were all working two to three jobs. I had three.
oh yeah. And you meet this remarkable man, and there's a significant part of the book where you guys go on this hike together. Talk about that, please.
Yeah, we in the summers when it got quiet, we started doing a lot of hiking and backpacking. And there was one particular one where nobody went with us, and he and I, it was at the end of the season, and we decided we're going to do this 30-mile hike to these hot springs. And we only had, I think, 2.5 days to get there. So we left after work one night and hiked a ridiculous distance, and I was wearing new shoes. And of course, we get halfway through the hike and they'd broken down on me already. And we just were getting stuck out there. And, it was this whole scene. But it was at that time that I think we both realized that not only were we interested in each other, but we were really falling in love with each other. And it was on that hike that we decided we wanted to get married.
Yeah. You get married. Your first little boy's born, and Brian will make a decision to join the military. Talk about that if you would.
It was the height of 2008, the big recession, and the gaming restrictions had been put, or banking restrictions had been put in place so that it really clamped down on his ability to earn income as an online poker player, which is ironic because you really could make a lot of money doing it, but it put us in a bad position. So he couldn't, at that time, jobs were just very few and far between. And so he was having an issue because he was overqualified, having a degree. He was overqualified for just, run of the mill jobs, but trying to get into a career with his degree, having no experience because he'd taken that time off after college to ski, they wouldn't hire him because he was underqualified. So at that time, we had to make the decision of somewhere that, would give us also, our son was on the autism spectrum, so we needed good insurance. I have epilepsy, so we, again, needed good insurance. So when it came right down to it, Brian had always wanted to be a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret, and I thought this is the perfect solution, and he did too, because we would be covered, and he could go and potentially try out for that ultimate thing he'd always wanted, to really test himself and see if he could, in fact, be the best of the best.
It's interesting. In the civilian world, there's sort of this rap, the military takes care of its own. But as we have seen many times, up to a point, and then there isn't. So Brian successfully graduates from SF school. He's on a team. He's deployed. And then comes this terrible time where they're going to send these guys to Africa. How long has Brian been in the military then? And here you are now. You have a second child, and he's going to go to Africa. Pick it up there, please.
Yeah, so he had done 2 deployments prior to the last one. So he'd gone to Afghanistan directly after graduating the Q course, and then he came back, got his Ranger tab, and then went to Niger, Africa, came home, and then again deployed. And this time he was gone only 5 weeks when I learned that there had been an ambush in the area that he was working out of, and that several Americans had been killed. And that night I received a knock at the door, and Brian was one of them.
There's so many questions being why you're there in the first place, and then the great sadness is these are incredibly brave men who are put in a very bad place, if you would.
Yeah, one thing that I think a lot of people have the misperception that, military men are not the brightest. We always hear that, you can go to jail or you can go into the army. Well, that's definitely not true, especially of special forces. So Brian was trained. He first of all, he was a chess champion when he was a child. He was a 1 second at nationals at 11 years old. So at that point, the reason they were there, all these guys were trained on languages. And so Brian was being an 18 Delta also, which is a medical sergeant. He had been trained, including to work in and out of emergency rooms and hospitals. He'd worked with veterinarians. He delivered babies, treated gunshot victims, could, do anything you could imagine. So he was there, and the guys were there to essentially ingratiate themselves to the locals and work alongside the locals, the local partner forces, soldiers there, to train them so that they could combat the growing threat of violent extremism all along their borders. And so we do that for a lot of our allies. If they ask us to come there, and considering we, as a whole, we are fighting the global war on terror. And so as terrorism builds in certain areas, if our allies ask us to come in and train their troops, I honestly think that's great. And it really is a good mission set. We're not really out. They shouldn't have been out in any sort of dangerous situation. What they're doing is basically just training these guys and teaching them so that hopefully we can pull out and never be more involved than just that. So really, yeah.
In the parallel universe, the rise of ISIS. ISIS comes out of Iraq. One of the great lies of certainly America's history is Bush and Cheney talking about weapons of mass destruction, Saddam Hussein's ties to Osama. These were fabrications. And ISIS is a byproduct. ISIS is the Bush-Cheney Frankenstein. Here's your husband, and who are these people? They're ISIS. And they are in the bush. They're the guys were actually looking for this terrorist leader in this village, Tonga Tonga. What was the mission, and then really what happens to those brave men in that outfit?
Well, and that's the thing. I've heard so many different things. The guys on the team actually told me that they were just supposed to go up to this campsite
Mm-hmm.
and exploit it, look for
Yeah,
any sort of intelligence. But then in the actual redacted report given to us by the military, there were a bunch of different confusing mission sets where it was like, well, they're there to capture, kill, or they're there to, you know, to detain, capture, detain.
yeah,
And a lot of these, the men on the team didn't. They had never even heard this. They
yeah.
just said no. We were just, you know. So they had actually gone up to what was considered a campsite. It was past Tonga Tonga. It was right on the border of Mali, which was extremely
Mm-hmm.
dangerous. And on their way back, they went through Tonga Tonga, and it turns out the village chief had a phone which actually had the terrorist phone number
Yeah,
stored in it. And so I would find out later that he had actually, according to the men on the team, had been stalling them, and they believe he had actually
sure,
contacted the
sure,
terrorist. And then
sure.
as they left the village, an ambush began to form. It actually wasn't already set up because they were supposed to be delayed, and they weren't. And so slowly, this group of terrorists began to pour into the road that they were beginning to leave. And so it started out as just a few attackers and turned into upwards of 150, something along those lines.
I've met some of the people from Black Hawk Down, and there's a case been made for your book, Sacrifice. This is the worst disaster for American GI since Black Hawk Down.
Yeah,
And we know what kind of a cluster Black Hawk Down was. And then the same game was played again. Uh, Everybody's got their hands in the air, and a general loses his career. And I mean, Black Hawk Down is a horrible, horrible mistake. And that's in the Clinton administration. Do you see similarities between like Pat Tillman and your husband and Black Hawk Down and the whole fiasco of Iraq? I mean, this is
I
great
do.
sadness. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do because when it comes right down to it, they're so busy, a lot of times the people running their investigations are so busy
yeah,
trying to cover their tracks, that they don't see the importance of being honest so we can
yeah,
prevent
yeah.
future loss of life and really learn lessons. Because that was a saying that was something I heard constantly, lessons learned,
Yeah.
and it's in the
Nonsense.
final redacted report, and that's great. But when you're not, there actually aren't lessons learned, and you are lying to the families, and you are
Yeah,
punishing people and holding people accountable who aren't or shouldn't be held accountable, and letting the ones who were responsible
yeah,
for what happened continue to progress up the chain and lead more people into battle, then we didn't learn anything.
no.
And
It's
yeah,
it's
and that,
called CY. It's called CYA.
yeah,
And
it is.
how I you have a part of the book that the report and redacted, 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 redacted. And this is in the final part where you know the truth. You've written the truth or you've sketched the truth. And now you see this report. Why can't they tell you, the widow of this incredibly brave man, exactly what happened?
I think the main reason they were doing all of this, well, when you look at the way the investigation was done, initially, a three-star command, SOC Africa, Special Operations Command Africa, opened an investigation into the ambush, which was instantly shut down by
Yeah,
the four-star general,
yeah,
um, the general of AFRICOM. And
yeah,
that is a big red flag to me as far as what are they trying to keep from, you know, um, being found, or who are they trying to prevent from being,
yeah.
you know, he's trying to protect his career essentially,
Yeah.
and his image. And so the four-star command is opens this investigation and designates an investigating officer who then of course finds no fault on the part of AFRICOM. Actually, they found one, but then it was denied, by the four-star general. So for me, the whole thing was about covering for certain officers.
But it's happened so many times, again and again and again. The great sadness is the bravery of men from Southeast Asia, the bravery of the Iraqi veterans, the bravery of Black Hawk Down, the bravery of your husband, and then the inability to tell the truth. In the book, you've spent all this time, you've met members of the team, you've become friends with these people, and you have pieced together, and there's a very powerful part of sacrifice where you know what people said to each other in these last moments of your husband's life. And then you get a report, just, your loss is great. This has to, it almost would think it would insult to injury. Why couldn't they sit down, hey, Michelle, here's what happened,
It was, and I think the weirdest thing was, so we had our family brief in 2018,
Yeah.
and then there was the media brief in 2018
Yeah.
by the four-star general of AFRICOM, General Waldhauser, in which he stated that all teams on the continent were performing optimally, but this team was not indicative of what special operators do. And that, honestly, that was a very memorable moment for me. I think that's when I snapped and I thought, okay, you can push and push and push me. I mean, my husband is dead. You've lied to me.
Yeah.
There's a video of his death out circulating around,
Yeah.
and now you are going to completely dishonor him and all the men who fought and died alongside him. And that is one step too far. Of all the things that I'd been through, I thought that that was the final straw. But I think the strangest thing was to sit down the following year with um, the the group that came from to deliver the redacted report. So we got a second family briefing after the review, and everybody knew it was a joke. And I knew
Yeah.
that these men coming, they were lower ranking, and they wanted to tell us the truth, but legally they couldn't or lose their jobs. So they weren't even at that point. They weren't at a level where they could have changed anything without losing their careers, and then even then, nothing would have changed. So it's like we all sat around and they gave us the report, and we all kind of just knew that
Yeah.
everything we were learning really was, you know, not,
Yeah.
they were half truths.
Well, there's a theory in history, the little untruths will lead to the big lie. We're watching it right now, politics in our country. And it's a series of lies that become, Neil Sheehan called it the bright shining lie. Vietnam. There was just a series of lies. It takes nothing away from the bravery of the men and women, but it is a lie. And that terrible firefight that you so well described, how long does that firefight last? And the Army, the DOD can't tell you, so you could tell your boys about their dad. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, all I really wanted going into our family brief is I wanted a detailed timeline of events on the ground. I didn't
Yeah.
care about who was responsible. I didn't care to see anybody
Well,
punished. All I wanted was please tell me what happened in his final moments
yeah.
because I know who he was. And
Yeah.
you're telling me that he was not honorable, that he was
Yeah.
somehow a victim because he got left
Yeah.
behind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I knew the minute he died, I thought, that is not my husband. My husband is
Yeah.
the person who would have run into the battle and been ordering everybody which way to go. That's
Yeah.
who he was. And that's what I discovered later. He did tell everybody, he's like, I think we need to keep these trucks
Yeah.
or our truck back here. and create a blocking position, and that's what they did, and that's why they got left behind, not because they got left behind, but
Yeah.
because they chose to stay there and fight so that their friends could get out. And,
They're they're also, before they go and while they're out, they're calling back and they're saying, look, this is going to go wrong. They're telling command, look, we're in a bad place at the wrong time. And they're told, continue the mission. And the captain in all of this, I think he's been sacrificed. The sergeant major, I mean, what happened, your husband's legacy, they ruined these very fine, brave men. But they're telling them, we shouldn't be doing this. Talk to that.
yeah, it was interesting because the first thing we heard before I even spoke to the guys that I heard that the captain was, bad. He was a cowboy.
Yeah,
He wanted to go. He had a cavalier attitude. He wanted to hunt down this terrorist.
yeah,
So I hear all this, and it just didn't ring true to me. That's not what
yeah,
Green Berets do. And even if he had been what they were saying he was, there's no way an entire group of Green Berets would go along with him, and certainly not my husband.
yeah,
That just it wasn't plausible at all. And so as I began to talk to the guys, you could see the frustration because what was being put out and broadcast to everybody wasn't
yeah,
at all how it happened. So
yeah,
we had been told that, they preferred not to go, but that they didn't really there was no real pushback. They just said, "Well, if you want us to go." And that I was sitting down with some of these guys who, one of them in particular, because interviewed them one on one. One of them was so frustrated, he was almost in tears, and he said,
yeah.
"Captain Perezzini pushed back so many times, so
Times.
hard that he was on the verge of losing his career over it.
Yes.
It was either lose your career or continue."
Yeah,
And so we finally just thought, "We'll do it, and we'll get it over with as fast as we can." And, in the end, it's ironic because not only did Captain Perezzini nearly lose his career pushing back, but then he was attacked and nearly lost it
yeah.
anyway for following through.
And then the guy walks up to him with a commendation piece of paper, hands it to him, and walks away.
Yeah, yeah.
It's you can see it in Benghazi. You can see it in so many things. And so you get a phone call from Donald Trump. Talk about that.
Yeah, I know there was big controversy about his phone calls, and nobody wanted to talk to me because there wasn't any.
Yeah, yeah,
It was actually really good. He called. I have a son on the autism spectrum, as I said
yeah,
before, and Ezekiel at that time was 11 years old. He was obsessed with Trump memes, and so he talked to President Trump, and he also spoke with my son Isaac. And then at the end of it, we were getting ready to bury Brian at Arlington, and President Trump said, "If there's ever anything I can do for you, please let me know." And I said, "Actually, we would like to stay in your hotel when I bury my husband in Arlington." We had just the summer before promised Ezekiel we would take him back and let him stay in the Trump hotel, but we honestly couldn't afford it. And so instantly he said, "I will do that for you guys. I will give you 2 rooms for 2 nights at my hotel, all expenses and food and everything covered. You go and just enjoy yourselves." And it
yeah,
was, really amazing.
yeah. I mean, it's where does the buck stop? And does it stop at DOD with a 4-star general? Does it stop with a lieutenant colonel? Where does the lie begin, and where does the investigation stop?
Yeah, and I think where we're having an issue is the way these investigations are even begun.
Yeah,
Because what has to happen is when an investigating officer is assigned, they're supposed to be unbiased, right? And
yeah,
it says that in because this was an AR-15-6 investigation, and it
mhm,
says that in the regulations, kind of in the officer guide to AR-15-6 investigations, you appoint an investigating officer who is unbiased.
yeah,
But the problem is that if the commander who is over him, the four-star commanding general, has a vested interest in the outcome of the investigation, then I guarantee you that investigating officer is going to be real careful not to
You
come out with
bet.
the wrong conclusion.
It's happened so many times. You begin with a conclusion and work backwards. And
Yeah.
that's what I think, and just as a reader of your book, they had a conclusion. They had something that they wanted to, the DOD, the JCS wanted to tell the world. So they had their conclusion, and then they made the parts fit going backwards.
Yeah.
And so now, how many times do you think between the Army, the DOJ, the government in general, and then there's this whole other rail of the media that's showing these horrible videos, and you're told, don't watch them. And how did you come through all of that?
And I'd like to address the video there as far as the don't watch them
Yeah.
because it was funny when there were two groups who released that video. They were CBS
Yeah.
and um, SOFREP.
Yeah.
SOFREP watermarked their video so that they could show that, it belonged to them,
Yeah.
ironically, which it actually belonged to one of the fallen soldiers. So that
Yeah.
was disgusting. And CBS released it saying, and another video has surfaced. We prayers
Yeah.
to the families. We can't even imagine how hard this must be. And I thought they're the
But
ones releasing it. They're the ones
yeah, yeah,
doing this to
sure.
us. It's completely ironic. And don't watch it, but you've got children. I mean, Jeremiah's girls were teenagers.
Yeah,
So they're not going to watch it, but all of their friends have probably seen it because it
sure.
flew across social media. And my children are 9 and 11. I had to take them off YouTube.
Yeah.
Um, and, but still kids, even 9 and 11, they have access, and so their friends had seen it. And so of course they're gonna see it. So not saying not watch it is crazy. And as far as getting through it, I don't know. It
Yeah.
adds so much more complexity and uh, pressure,
No, it was like
PTSD.
that moment in Black Hawk where the guy's in his underwear and they're dragging him through the street. You didn't have to show that. I mean,
No,
I'm a big First Amendment character, but there's a moment, and the family saw their son dragged through the streets. And
yeah,
remember, uh, there's a moment in the book, and I wanted to make sure. There's two things I want to make sure. Now there's a paperback or a soft cover coming of this book. I want you to show it on screen because people may see it someplace else and not see this cover. So, Michelle,
yeah,
hold that book up there. There you go. And that's the new cover, and it's the photo. On this one, of course, it's just this sad picture of you receiving the
yeah.
flag that I see over your shoulder. But that's the new. There's a moment in the book that this is our first time I've ever spoken to you or met you. But what was done to your son in school? Uh, the the way the principal and vice principal treat that kid. Would you mind telling that story as well?
Yeah, and I'll preface it by saying this was the worst of about 10 very similar instances, and I thought I don't need to write a whole book on how many times he was mistreated. But the day the video released, uh, I had been up all night, just a mess, and I took Zeke into school the next day. He had been suspended from another similar incident. And so I thought it was his first day back after a week. He needs to see his friends. And despite the video, I thought he's at school. Surely they've got the computers locked down and
And
they
you
can.
warned them. You warned the school too. I mean,
I
you,
did. I went
yeah,
in and I said, "This is what happened. I'm a mess. Can you just take him for a few hours and I will come back? He just needs to be around his friends and he doesn't know about the video, so keep him away from screens." And I got a call an hour later that Ezekiel had scratched Niger into a computer screen, but they believed that he had actually meant the N word. And if you knew my son, he's not an idiot. He knows
yeah,
how to spell, and he knew the
yeah.
difference between the two words.
It
So
was a
it was,
country his father was killed in.
yeah. And he
Yeah,
was in front of a computer, and I
yeah,
was told I needed to replace the screen. the computer, and they'd be sending me a bell. And my son needed to leave for a while. He would be suspended again, and that, don't worry, we had a very serious conversation with him about the word and uh, basically how it affects people. And I told them in that minute, oh, and they told me that they were afraid that he was going to become violent because of his recent behavior.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was trying myself not to become violent. And I told, I think the words were that they were never allowed to speak to him alone without me present ever
Yeah.
again.
You know what I thought? And again, that's the educational bureaucracy of self protection, how they treated your boy and how they treated you. Over here is the DOD, the Department of the Army, the military, how they treated you. And the similarities, and I don't know if I'm out of line here, but the similarities of a self protective bureaucracy and bringing you in and accusing your boy of being a racist and the insanity of making the accusations against your husband and the captain, and because they didn't fit the lie. And always go back to Neil Sheehan's book, The Bright Shining Lie, and the idea of all the little untruths that lead to the big lie. I
Yeah.
think you're an important woman. I mean, you're so significant. You got a heart of a lion. I don't think they had any idea who they were tangling with when they started running a con on you,
Yeah.
and that speaks volumes.
Yeah, and I think that when you have men who are this intelligent and they work at such a high
Yeah,
capacity and they're willing to give their
yeah,
lives, and I looked at all of this as their lot as the DoD, or those
huh,
specific individuals are lying to me, and then I've got
yeah,
the school here with my kid. I'm looking at it and I'm going, my husband died for
yeah,
all of you,
yeah,
regardless of
yeah,
race, creed, like political stance, like that. Him and all of his teammates died for all of you,
yeah, yeah.
and knowing full well that he had done that, and they were willing to disparage him. I just thought, this is so, it's so symbolic.
Since the book's been out, have you heard from any of those command officers, the generals? Have you heard from the DOD, Department of the Army? I know you talked to the men who were there, but have you heard from anybody say, "Hey, gee, we're sorry"?
There are a lot of specific people who, especially those who were three-star or
Yeah,
whatnot, who just said, you know, all right, like, we did as much as we could
yeah,
within the parameters of our
yeah,
job.
yeah,
And honestly, I had the support of a lot of amazing people. Unfortunately, there are a few who always ruin it for everybody. And usually they're the people who can't even stand to face the families and lie to their
yeah,
faces. And that's what it comes right down to. The people who lied
yeah.
on camera were not the ones coming up to me and lying to my face. Um, so, as far as General Waldhauser, yeah, and even Lieutenant Colonel Painter, who ran
Yeah,
the whole operation, and as far as I'm aware, has not been affected by it.
yeah,
Um, he came to my house, but he didn't go to any of the other families' houses, and he did actually lie to my face at my house.
yeah,
So
sure.
I
Yeah,
can at least give him that.
yeah.
But um, that was amazing. But yeah, most
You're
of
the
them.
best. What will happen? I mean, I know the boys are doing a lot better. You're both now you're back snowboarding. Um, what will happen next? What do you think will happen next for you and for the kids?
Well, the boys will be successful, and
Yeah,
Isaac wants to be a doctor, and
yeah,
Ezekiel wants to fly planes in the military, so he wants
yeah,
to go into the Air Force.
yeah.
So I think they'll both do really well. They're both straight A students, very smart. My next goal is to start up a 501(c)(4), which is basically a nonprofit that works
Um,
to see uh, like legislative changes happen. So what I'm working on is to I've opened up a Soldiers Alliance, and we're going to start working on hopefully affecting the way investigating officers are assigned.
We're as close as the phone. If you need us, pick up the phone. We're here for you. And hell of a week with that book. And I recommend everybody. It's just the truth. And it's devastating, but it's all been done before, as we say. What happened to you isn't the first, and tragically it won't be the last as long as these conditions exist. And I think the world of you, Michelle. I really do. I think Bryan deserves all of this. He really does.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll ski. Or you board, I'll ski, or we'll bring the boys. And I would love it too. I think the world of you will do this again. Again, do yourself a favor. I'm going to hold this up to the screen to see it. It's now in paper. Michelle, hold the paperback up so people, in case they just see it's a different cover, has the pictures of the fellas. And read this and urge others to do so too. Take care of yourself. I'll see you again. Thanks for doing the shoot. You're welcome.
Thank you
Michelle
so
Black,
much.
everybody. Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.